Hi, friends. Welcome back to Journey of the Joyful Life podcast. I'm Melodie, the host of this podcast, and we're so glad that you're here with us again. Thanks for coming back. Last week, I ended the podcast with kind of where my story took a really big shift, and the trajectory of what I thought my life was going to be like in China moved to a different area. So I'd like to pick up where I left off and finish kind of that part of my story today. After I put all my things on a truck and sent my things to Guiyang from Wuhan, I knew that my life was going to be really, really different. And I was kind of walking into something that I didn't even know how to prepare for. I just knew that I wasn't prepared for it, and that the Lord was going to have to be the one that really showed me. And not that whenever I went to China, I didn't feel the exact same way, but I went with a team. So when I moved to Wuhan, I had a team of other new people that were there with me that I was able to know, and they became such sweet friends of mine. But when I moved to Guiyang, I was all by myself, and I was moving into a space with people that I didn't know. I'd only met twice. I had been there twice. And also those people were not from my same home country. They also weren't Chinese. They were from the Netherlands, and so a culture that I wasn't super used to. And I knew it was just going to be different. So I love adventure. I wasn't really worried about the adventurous part of it. I was more worried about the logistical part of what in the world am I going to do and how am I going to fit in here. Also in Wuhan, lots of people spoke English. In Guiyang, just from the very small amounts of time I had been there, no one spoke English except for the couple that I moved in with. So that was a really long, kind of somber train ride from Wuhan to Guiyang. Just knowing like this, my life is going to be different, and I'm following the Lord in obedience, but I don't have a clue what's going to happen. And so getting there to Guiyang, getting settled in, Mariana, the woman who I moved in with, she and her husband Hans, were precious. Mariana became one of my dearest friends. We had a lot of hurdles to overcome because we didn't know each other, and we saw things really differently. We had experienced life in very different ways. She had been living in China for many, many years. Also, she had been living in that area of China, and she experienced things there so differently than what I had experienced in my 1 year in Wuhan. And one of the most incredible things that Mariana did with me whenever I first moved to Guiyang and I first was living in her home, I was in my late 20s, Mariana was in her 60s, so the age gap was really huge, but just her relationship with the Lord was so deep, and I loved the way that she relied on him for everything, and I loved the way that she came to him all the time. And one thing that she was really good at was stopping and resting, even just in small moments. And that was something that I had always struggled with for my whole life. I love to be busy. I thrive in doing, and stopping and allowing myself to even have a coffee break was really a struggle. Like, coffee was something that you just drink as you went, throughout your day, and not for Mariana. Mariana had coffee at a time each day, and she sat and she did nothing and she drank her coffee. And that was really a struggle for me. And I know that sounds really funny, but this is a practice that she had that I learned to embrace, at least during my years in China. I need to be better at that these days. But in the mornings, after we got all the kids fed, when I first moved there to her home, there were 12 children. So those children had a lot of different needs, and there were Chinese workers that worked with the kids, and we called them Ayis, and that's like an auntie, a Chinese auntie that would come in and help, that Mariana paid to be there and work with the kids. So there were 12 kids, various different ages, various different needs, but we'd get everyone up, get everyone dressed and ready for the day and fed, and then the Ayis would take the kids to a different floor in our house and play with them, let them play, watch some TV. And Mariana and I would go and pray. So that was our first little meeting of the day together. was that prayer time that we had together. And we started that pretty soon after I moved in with her. And even when she and I would have kind of like friction between us, or we would really be thinking things differently, there would be a struggle, some kind of confrontation. That prayer time was so precious, and it brought us so much closer together, and our hearts were so much more vulnerable for one another whenever we took that time to pray. And we were very faithful about our prayer time. And I can honestly say that I have always been really devoted to prayer. Prayer means a lot to me. That's my relationship with the Lord, just talking to him and having that time. But I hadn't really ever in my life for consistent periods of time had someone that came in and prayed with me every single day. Since I had been a child, my mother obviously did that with me whenever I was a child, but in my adult life, I had, small groups in college and relationships with people that I had prayer with, but the consistency of the daily prayer with Mariana in that first year, whenever I lived in Guiyang, I'm sad to say that we didn't do it as consistently as the years went on. We still prayed together very often, but not the same as in that really just pivotal time in the beginning when we were learning to work together. And I really feel like the Lord used that to knit our hearts together. And so my heart would long for something, and I would say it in the prayer, and then afterwards she's like, "Oh, Melodie, I hear, this is where your heart is leaning and what it's, longing for." And I'm like, "Yes, Marianne, I really feel like this is what the Lord is wanting us to do, wanting me to do as I'm here." And so then her heart would be softened because she would hear my heart being poured out to the Lord about this. And so I wanted to talk about this because prayer is so important to me, but also prayer is so pivotal for the work that the Lord has called me to do. It was really important to me that if we had a need in our home, that we didn't just tell everybody what the need was. And so many different heroes of the faith, especially Hudson Taylor, different ones, as they had needs, they didn't go out and share what the need was. They told the Lord what their need was, and they trusted that the Lord would meet their need. Obviously, the Lord used people many, many times to meet the needs of, the great Christians that we read about, and obviously those in the Bible as well. But I really felt like that was the way that the Lord wanted me to lead my life. And so she and I kind of committed to that together, and we would just pray for our needs in those moments. And the Lord was so faithful from the very beginning of those early days whenever I had moved to Guiyang. Not all of my prayers obviously were with Mariana, because I had some really deep heart prayers just personally. Those first few months whenever I lived in Guiyang, I moved in June, at the end of June. They were a real struggle. Probably the most lonely and just bare that I felt in my life had been in those times. I literally did not feel like there was anyone, that I had anyone I could really pour my heart out to or be relational with in a close way, except for the Lord. And I can understand definitely on this side of it why he put that there for me, because it allowed our relationship to be even closer, just my reliance on the Lord. So about the end of July, we got a call in the foster care system there where we were. There was lots of different pieces to that, and I probably don't have time to talk about that in this particular episode, but we got a call. Mariana got a call. I was just there to support Mariana at this time, but there was a baby in the orphanage, and the foster care leader, the man, had called and said to Mariana, asked her if she wanted to take this baby. And like I said, we had 12 kids at the time, and Mariana was done. She didn't want to take in any more kids under her name as a foster mother. And when she said, "No, we're not going to take the baby," I was like, hold up. I don't want us to say no. Here we're doing this together now, and we have a huge house. We have room. And I said, how would you feel about if I took this baby, if this was one that started like under my foster mom life? And she's like, "Well, okay, maybe." And so we went and had some meetings with some people who were over foster care, like a foreigner who was over foster care, who I didn't really know well at the time, but have, obviously grew to be great friends with but he had a meeting with me and, kind of told me, this is what it's like. If you become a foster mother in China, this is what you're signing up for. And I thought, oh my goodness, what do I have to lose? I mean, this is where the Lord's put me. This is what I'm going to do. Yes, where do I sign? And so that was the American guy who was kind of over the foreigners that were working in foster care. But then there was the Chinese side of it. And so the orphanage would come to the Chinese man and say, these are the children that we're going to let out of the orphanage that need a foster home. Do you have anybody that would take him? So then if that man didn't have a Chinese family that would take the child, then he would reach out to the foreign kind of liaison person, and then that man would see if any foreigners had a available spot in their homes. Typically, the Chinese foster parents would take children who had limb differences, cleft lip, cleft palate, or other types of orphans. They didn't often take the neurodivergent or disabled orphans at all. Those were more what the foreigners took care of. So Mariana had decided very early on in her time there that she would take only children who were disabled. Some of the other foreigners didn't have that in their home. They would take more of a myriad of kids. One home was specifically for kids with HIV and, just different things like that. But ours was specifically for kids who were disabled. And so at first that was a little bit hard for me because I'm like, can't we just take anybody? And as the time went on, I realized the importance of pouring our hearts and time into that, because more neurotypical children take up different parts of your brain and your mind that you need to give and pour into. And I can see how we really needed to be able to give everything we had to our children that were disabled. They just need something different. And so it would be hard to have them together in that space. So after I met with the man and, he said, okay, well, I think Melodie, you can have this baby as to be your first foster baby if you want. And I was thrilled. I was so excited. They told me, you can have this child and, he can come into your home. And so I got everything ready and they said, oh, it's going to be a girl. She's about, 18 months old and you can come pick her up tomorrow. And so, oh my goodness, Mariana had a room in her house with bins and bins of clothes and blankets and things. And so I found all these really nice girl clothes that I, wanted to pick out and washed them and got them ready, and the bedding. And I had a room in the second floor of the home. The home was really cool. It was, if you can imagine, looked like a box. And you might have seen pictures of old China homes look like a box, and it had 4 floors. The bottom floor was on the ground level and you came in, and immediately when you came in, you walked upstairs to get to the first floor, which is actually the second floor. And on that floor was the kitchen and a long hallway with the dining room. And then my room was at the very end. And then we had like a laundry room down there and a very long area where we kept everyone's shoes, because in Chinese homes, you don't wear your shoes inside. And so everyone's shoes were kept there, and then you would walk up another floor, and from the middle of that second floor, you could see all the way up. It was the rooms kind of went around in a square, and so you could see up, and we would hang laundry from the that open space where it hung down on the railings, because there's no dryers, only washing machines, no dryers, so we would hang the laundry there, and that's how it would dry. So most every day when you looked up, it was full of clothes. Kids' clothes, and it was very open air, no air conditioning, no heating. We lived in the countryside, and so it was very cold in the winter and damp. It was always damp. We lived in a really damp area of China. And so after that third floor where like the kids' bedrooms were all around the edges, and then Hans had a room that he kind of like his man cave room, and then there was a sensory room for the kids. So we had different things set up. But then on the very top floor was a big room where the kids played, with some little playrooms off the edge. So 4 different floors. So mine was on the second, my room was on the second floor. And I had made a little spot in my room, a little sitting area, because it was uniquely shaped. And I put a baby bed in there. And I was like, okay, this is going to be my baby. I'm going to call her Hannah. I'm so excited. And so I was so happy whenever we went there to pick her up. We went to the foster office. That's what we called the place where kind of like we met. If the orphanage needed to come, we would meet at the foster office and bring our children, and they would do medical checks, or if someone was getting their paperwork done so they put in the system so they could be adopted, we would do all that stuff right there. The kids didn't typically go back into the orphanage for any of that stuff. They would come there. So we went there. Most of the time, if there was one baby coming out of the orphanage, there were several babies coming out at the same time, or children. And so they would call a few foster parents, and we would all meet there, and then they would dole out the children. And so we get there, and I'm like looking around, and I see over on a couch, there's a baby laying on the couch. And they said, "Oh, Melody, there's your baby over there." And so I walk over there, and, I pick her up, and I'm like, oh my goodness, wow. I'm kind of overwhelmed. Like, I can't imagine. And of course, like, I love her already. And there's a little, she was wrapped up in a blanket, and there was a little tag on the front of the blanket that had 3 characters, and that was the Chinese name. And there was a date underneath it. And so that was the birthday. And that's how, when we got home, I would keep the records of all my children based on their name and their birthday. And it was just kind of pinned to the blanket. So picked the baby up, headed to the car. There wasn't really much to do, and started back home. And I'm thinking this whole time just how excited I am and a little bit overwhelmed. And the first thing that we always did when we got a child straight from the orphanage is when we got home, we would give the child a bath. And so, I came in and went straight to the bathroom. I had everything already ready to go. And I unwrapped this baby that I was very sure was a girl. And it was a boy. And I was like, oh my gosh, Mariana, maybe they made a mistake. Are we sure this is the baby we were supposed to take home? And we're like, okay, well, the baby has Down syndrome, yes. And this is the name that they told us, that was put on his blanket. And it's not a girl, it's a boy. And so they had made a mistake, not by the baby, but by the gender. And something between the orphanage and the foster department. And it was a boy. And I was like, okay, well, this is not Hannah. And so I said, well, this is going to be Samuel, because this is my first baby. I've been longing to be a mother for my whole entire life. I'm so excited. So it was easy for me to call him Sammy. And so I gave Sammy a bath. Sammy was the most, he ranks like in the top 5 of the most lifeless babies that I was given. Sometimes I would get a child from the orphanage or from another foster home that would come into my home that, I could tell had been poured into a little bit, at least had been loved, or at least had some life in his face. Sammy didn't. There was nothing behind his eyes. And after I gave him a bath and I immediately went into my bedroom, I told Mariana, like, I'm just going to spend time with this baby today and see if I can just hold him. I don't know if he's ever been held, and I don't know how much he's eaten or what he eats or how he eats. He looked about 8 months old in size, but obviously he was 18 months old by age for what they thought. And Sammy had been in the orphanage for all that time. He had been dropped off like right after he was born. And so I sat there in this chair holding him, and I just started to cry. And I thought, Lord, I cannot give this baby anything. Like, he doesn't even want me. I wasn't a stranger to babies. I had been caring for babies for what seemed like my whole life. But even other people's babies that I had cared for had at least been happy or, desired to want to be held. And at that moment, I felt like Sammy didn't even care if I held him or if I loved him. There was just nothing there. And I talked to him, and I told him how much that the Lord loves him and how much I loved him. And I just thought, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know that I have what it takes to pour life into this child that's so lifeless. And as I was just crying, and I said that I just don't know, Lord, you're going to have to give me love for this child, because I don't know how to feel towards him right now. And it was just really bare. I really bared my soul to the Lord. And in that moment, the Lord spoke to me and said, this is your child, Melody. He is your child, and you are his mother. And, he really didn't say much more except that he is your child. Like, I felt like it's like, get it in gear. Like, love him. He's yours. He's your baby. I have given you a baby, so love him. And I just remember thinking, how? What do I do? How do I fix him? And I didn't want to fix the Down syndrome. I loved, if he was precious and adorable, I didn't care anything about that. I'm like, how do I make him feel love? How do I help him to know that he's so cared for? And this, how can I keep him safe also? Because, it's foster care. It's not American foster care. This Chinese foster care. At any moment, something can change and he can be removed. So pouring this love into him, knowing that I don't know how long it's going to be that I get to pour this love into him. Even though the Lord's told me he's mine, what does that mean? What does that look like? So for days, I just woke up every morning thinking, Lord, just please help me to be able to pour love into Sammy and help him to feel love, help him to be able to feel that people love him and want to care for him. And I'll never forget, it was months later that I went to Melodie is a co-sleeper with children. I was very, very much that this child's never felt bonding. He needs to feel bonding. And so I forget the baby bed in my room. Like, he's going to sleep right next to me in the bed. I want him to know how much I love him and that I'm here for him now. Maybe someone wasn't there for him before, but I'm here for him now. So he slept with me, but whenever he would take a nap, he could roll. So I would put him in his bed. So one day I walked over to his bed and I bent down and I said, "Hey, Sammy boy, how are you?" And he like barely smiled. It was like, I think he wanted to smile at me. Oh my goodness. And of course I'm like, crying my eyes out. Like, I think Sammy wants to smile. I think he knows that I love him. And it was just like that little glimmer of hope. Because at that point in Sammy's life, he didn't offer any smiles to anyone. And it's so ironic because if you know my Sammy now, he's full of joy and smiles all the time. If he's being talked to and communicated with, he loves to smile. But he just didn't know. It's like, I'm sure those muscles hadn't even been developed in his face because I don't know that he'd ever smiled before. And so our relationship was definitely a slow building one. And the Lord really had his hand on that. So at the same time that Sammy was with me, there was another 2 girls in our home that had come in between the first time I came to Mariana's and the second time I came to Mariana's before I moved there. And these 2 girls were older, 12 years old, and they had been dropped off. Nobody knew where, but they had been found, taken to the orphanage. There were some pieces of their story that we were able to hear, but taken to the orphanage, and then they needed to get them out of the orphanage and into a foster home. And both of them had disabilities, and so they had been passed around from Chinese foster families for a while, both of them. And then it wasn't working out for them to be in Chinese foster families, so Mariana accepted them into her home. So she had 10 kids the first time I visited her, and then the second time I visited her, she had 12, and she said, "I just got these 2 big girls, and I can't put them with the other children. That their behaviors are not where I can put them together with the other kids." And I thought, oh my gosh, what is going on? They can't be with the other kids. I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about kids with disabilities and behaviors, trauma. I was real fresh. And so I went in. I was so excited to go in and meet them the first time I had come. But when I met them, I realized, oh wow, this is a lot. I don't have a clue what to do. So whenever I moved there and I came back, one of the girls had been able to integrate a little bit in with the other girls. It had been like a month. But she had to be watched all the time. She had definitely been abused. And she did things to the other kids that showed signs of the abuse that she had experienced. And it was dangerous. So if an adult was there, she would not exhibit those behaviors. But if you left the room, immediately she would. And so as long as the adult was there, she would play nicely with the other kids. So then we would put her in another room if we had to leave to keep everybody safe. But the other little girl, her face was covered in probably what was a staph infection, but she would put her hands in her mouth all the time, and yeah, her face was always infected. And it was the winter time. It had been the winter time, and coming into the spring and summer times, um, her slobber, and she would suck her thumb, and it would get all over her face. So they weren't sure if she was contagious or what it was, so they would keep her in another room. And also the Ayis said that this particular child cursed in Chinese. And I was like, oh, well, I don't know any curse words in Chinese, so it won't affect me. It doesn't matter. But they didn't want her to be with the other kids because they didn't want the kids to learn that. But they said she doesn't speak. She's completely mute. She's 12 years old, except sometimes she says Chinese curse words. And I was like, okay, so I can work with that. I can ignore the cursing because I don't know what it is. And at that time, when I first moved to Guiyang, my Chinese was so limited. I could barely speak a few words in Chinese. Like I could get around, where's the bathroom? How much do these things cost? I knew the bus numbers of where I needed to go, and I knew how to ask for a taxi. I learned addresses, basic things. But when I moved into Guiyang and in Mariana's house, I learned really fast because no one spoke English to me. And I was having to communicate with the Ayis and use sign language and all these different things, not real sign language, just hand signals as to what they were talking about and how to communicate with the children. The children could speak Dutch and they could speak Chinese. Their English wasn't very good at all because not very many people were speaking English with them. But I spoke English to them all the time. And so they all eventually learned English, but they all kept their Dutch because Mariana spoke Dutch with them. So all the kids in her home could understand receptive language, and the ones who could speak would speak in those 3 different languages. They were very smart. But this one girl who no one knew what to do with her behaviors were so hard. So Mariana basically said, Melodie, I need you to work with her. She's going to be kind of like your project. And guys, I had such a hard time with her. I did not know what to do. I felt as though she just strategically wanted to ruin my life because everything I would do or give to her, she would either laugh at or, like spit at me or, there's all these different things. But most of the things that she did included laughing. And it would get exhausting. I was like, I do not know how to even connect. Like, there's no connection here. Obviously, there are things going on in her brain, but I have zero connection with this child. And so learning how to connect with her, learning how to help her. She was 12. She couldn't use the restroom effectively. I'm sure that she had been abused because of that, because she has a lot of trauma around the restroom. And so just learning how to get to know her. So I had already started that whenever I got Sammy. But that relationship was really strained. And because she was older, I knew if she doesn't get adopted, she's going to be an orphan in China forever. And, she has until she's 14. At her 14th birthday, she loses the ability to be able to be adopted. And so I didn't know what to do, but I just started trying to build connections with her, little by little, trying to build connections. And it did end up that she began to have connection with me because she wouldn't give a time of day to anybody else, but she would pretend as though she could understand what I was saying and, do small things and do commands that I would ask her to do. And so her name was Yame. And at this time, Yame and I kind of grew our connection. Well, when Sammy came into the picture, I wore Sammy a lot in a carrier. And so she got to know Sammy, and she connected to Sammy faster even than she connected to me. She and Sammy had a really sweet bond, and that really helped her to open up. It helped her to soften. It helped her to kind of extinguish some behaviors because no longer was she like a baby. He was the baby, and so she could be a little bit older. And she learned like one-word phrases in English. She never really spoke full sentences in Chinese ever to me. I'm not sure if she ever did that for anybody, but I knew that she had experienced a lot of trauma. I could tell by the behaviors that she had. So as we grew together, we learned a lot about each other, but she did learn English pretty quickly because I didn't have Chinese to give her. I only had English, and we built a connection. So then she started to learn English. So um, that relationship, those two relationships really started to build. The 10 other children in the home called Marianne a mama, and Sammy never used words, but I was Sammy's mom. And Yame would would call me all different things when she'd call me something. I could tell she must have a lot of trauma around moms, because she would call someone mama if she wanted something from them, but she never endearingly called anybody mama. And sometimes she would call me Melodie, sometimes she would call me Chenmei, which is my Chinese name. And sometimes she would call me Ai, like the auntie. She did all kinds of names for me. For years and years she did this. But it was about 6 months in to having Yame that I knew the Lord was so clear with me that Yame was supposed to be my child. And even more than Sammy, I really fought that in my heart. I thought, Lord, I already have Sammy. Like, I'm all by myself. I'm single. Sammy's my baby. I could probably just have one. And the Lord was like, nope, Yame is your child, and you're going to adopt her first because she's going to age out. And I was like, Lord, this is a long, drawn out thing. Like, her life is so in depth, and I do not know what I'm going to do with her. And he didn't care. He knew what I was going to do with her, and he just kept speaking that into me. And so during that time, I had come back to the States. I had been in Guiyang for about 6 months, and I needed to come back to the States because Marianne and Han's support from the Netherlands was enough to support them and their 10 children that they had. But as we got more children who were under my name, slowly we were going to need more support money, and I was going to need more support. And I had gotten a visa through the university there to take Chinese classes, and I had an amazing tutor who came to our home, and who I still have a relationship with today. The last time I went to China, I got to visit her, but she didn't make me go to a class. She just came to my home, and she would, like, point to something and speak it in Chinese, and then have me do it after her. And over again, she would go to the grocery store with me and point to something and speak it in Chinese and make me speak it after her. And she was like my real life Rosetta Stone, like in my face all the time. And she was incredible. She helped me so much to learn Chinese, to learn how to speak Mandarin, and to functionally be able to listen. She taught me a lot about listening, and about, just how to listen to the Guiyanghua, the language of Guiyang, versus the language of Mandarin, the dialect of the whole country. So that was really fun. I loved that, and I loved having her, and she became my friend, which was amazing. But I needed to be able to raise support money because I didn't have a job to be able to support our home. So I came back to the States at that time, and I had a Barnabas group from my church who prayed for me. They were so committed to pray for me all the time from the time that I left. And whenever I left for China with my Barnabas group, I told them, I'm going to write a blog. So every month you guys can read the blog, read the updates, and, that'll be a way that we can connect. And I can put pictures in there, and it was so much fun. And I called my blog Journey of a Joyful Life, because I said this in the last episode, that I wanted it to be not just like Melodie's blog, something a little bit more fun. So I named Journey of a Joyful Life my blog name, and I loved having that. I loved writing that, especially during my time in Wuhan, because, just action-packed. There were things happening all the time. And so when I moved to Guiyang, still kept up my blog, but when I came to the States, I was talking to my Barnabas group, and they said, we really feel like we need to start a nonprofit organization so that people can give and have tax write-offs to give for the ministry going on in China. And I was like, well, I don't even have a clue. Well, how do we do that? And so one of the guys in my Barnabas group, he was the most special, sweet friend to me and prayed for me so often. His name was George Jones. He said, well, I think that we need to find a board in the Barnabas group. Part of the Barnabas group can be your board. We can assign, different people. He was a businessman. also an elder at our church. And, he's like, if you're okay with it, I can be the president. And I was like, yes, George, that'd be amazing. And so at that time when I came for 6 weeks. That was the first time I had come home since I had left to go to Wuhan. It had been almost a year and a half. And we kind of put into place all the pieces that it would take to set up a board and have Journey of a Joyful Life. Because one of my things was, I don't know what we're going to call our organization, George. And he goes, we're going to call it Journey of a Joyful Life, just like your blog. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that works for me. I didn't really care. I didn't really have like a long-term vision, except that I just needed a way for people to be able to support the kids and I in China. And so I came back to China, and George was on it. He got everything set up, submitted. Some people from our church volunteered to help with some legal parts of it. And by January 2013, Journey of a Joyful Life became an organization. And people were able to give. And I had done some speaking engagements during that first time here, just sharing about the work that we were doing. And the Lord just began to bless. I mean, he brought in so much. Every single need we had was met at the right time as we grew. During those first few months, the orphanage would call, they would have a baby. And I'm like, we're not going to say no. So we'd open up another room and we would hire a few more IEs. And the number of children, by like November of the very first fall, after I got Sammy, that November, we had about 18 kiddos. We had a boy come from another foster home to live with us. His autism was pretty severe. And at that time, I didn't have a lot of language to know, because our kids that came into our home, most all of them were labeled as MR, like from a Chinese perspective, that's what they had. And so we had to kind of figure out, some of them would be labeled cerebral palsy, but you're like, I don't think that child actually has cerebral palsy, but in the language, it's just, that their brain is, has a different function. But they would label children in really huge groups that in America, we wouldn't label them in the same ways. So I had to sort of pick through that as I was researching, like, how would we support a child with autism? How do we support a child that has cerebral palsy? What does it look like? What kind of therapies do they need? I have no idea. I was a musician. I know how to do music for some kids that have some disabilities in my classroom of neurotypical kids. So I was really I just crying out to the Lord, how in the world, what am I going to do? We can't just keep them in a room. Because up to that point, Mariana had been loving her children so well. And some of the girls got to go to a school in our city that allowed really high functioning children with disabilities to come in, but they capped the number, and they only allowed a certain number of orphans to be able to be a part of that number, and only orphans that were in foster care. And so I think 3 of our girls went to that school, and then they would go and come every day. But so many other children, what are we going to do? And they all had to be potty trained to be able to go to that school. Well, that was such a hard thing for so many of our kids. And so I said, well, we have to be able to have some schooling, have some structured activities for them during the day, for these 18 kids that we had at this time. And so I asked Mariana, like, how would you feel about me doing some classroom stuff with them? Like, we could make, 2 different classrooms, and they could kind of rotate between these 2 classrooms or 3 classrooms throughout the day. And, one could just be puzzles and coloring, and the next one could be crafts, and the next one could be, I'm just trying to use what we have, what people had donated to her home, and be able to do something creative for the kids. So slowly we helped. I had these 3 actually really amazing IEs, and they had worked for Mariana for years. And one of my hardest things with the IEs were that I felt like there was a huge separation between us. They were super loyal to her, to Mariana, and I was just some random person that came to help. And I know, because Mariana had lots of volunteers that had come to help her throughout the years. Maybe in the past they had gotten kind of close to someone and then they left. And so I was just another girl that came in, had all her own thoughts, and I was going to change everything up and expect them to do it. And so I had just prayed, Lord, help me to be able to make sweet connections with these women where they don't feel like I'm just coming in, raining on their parade, and then I'm just going to leave, like help them to trust me. And that trust-based relationship with those women was just as important, if not more than it was with the kids. And so it took a really long time. That first time I came to the States, I bought all of them presents and put it in my suitcase to bring back to China because I wanted to show them presents are a big thing in China, like a gift. And so I wanted them to know how grateful I was for the work that they did. They all worked so hard, but also that the connection was really important to me. So a few of them were really willing to open their hearts to me and were really on board with doing the classes for the kids. So I kind of put each one of them in charge of a different group, and they facilitated. And as my Chinese got a little bit better, I could communicate with them what I wanted, and Mariana helped to translate, especially in the beginning. And we did it. That kids would wake up and I put them into 3 different groups, and then one of them would take a walk outside, and one of them would go to the puzzle room, and one of them would go to the playroom, and one of them would do like a little bit of academics. And so it started really, really slowly. And by the time the new year came of that first year, we were actively having more children. Mariana had really decided, like, Melodie, this is the work that God has given to us, and he wants us to give it to you. We want to take a back burner. We want you to lead out. And I was so caught off guard. I was like, no, that's not what I signed up for. Mariana, I came here to help you. I want to help you. I love helping you. I don't want to be in charge. I don't want to be in charge. I'm really good at, you just tell me what to do. I might have some ideas I can add into it, but I'm going to be fine to just help. And she's like, no, I'm tired. I really think that you can take over, and we'll still have our support money coming in from the Netherlands, but you need to take over. And I just remember thinking, like, Lord, I cannot even communicate. Like, if somebody gets sick, I cannot be an advocate for them in the hospital yet. How am I going to take this over? Like, I need her to be in charge, and I just need to be, the back burner. I want to be in the back burner. And the Lord clearly told me, Melodie, this is what you're going to do. Like, every step, really and truly, there have been not any other times in my life where the Lord had been so clear about, this is what you're going to do. This is what you need to walk in. This is what I've called you to do. And so I did. I said, okay, Lord, if you're going to give me this, I will take it, and I will do the best that I can do. That's all I can give. And so some things happened. Marianne and Hans needed to go back to the Netherlands for a break. Some things happened with the government where we needed to leave that home that we were in. And that was kind of the first huge hurdle that I had to overcome, was finding a place to move us, all of the children and myself, to a different place. So the Lord provided miraculously. I had no idea what was going to happen, but he provided a place, apartment complex where we lived. Incredibly enough, it happened that we were living on the 15th, 16th, and 17th floors, 3 apartments, one right on top of the other. It was the exact same apartment, just one right on top of the other. And then the 21st floor. So we could climb those stairs really quick, 15, 16, 17, 21. And we would do that. And then, so that's where we moved. We had about 21 kids. We got some kids right at that time, but the government didn't want more than 6 children in one apartment. They wanted the homes separated. They didn't want so many kids in one house, because that seemed like an overwhelming number. Even though our home in the countryside was huge, it was 4 floors, it had so many rooms. But I understood they were trying to keep it safe for the kids. So I did understand that. It was just a struggle, and it was really quick. Like, you have a week, this needs to happen, or we're going to take all the kids back to the orphanage. And I was like, oh my word, and that is one good thing about Melodie, is that, don't say I can't, because I'm going to make it happen. Right. And so I'm like, Lord, this has to happen. We have to do it together. Let's go. And so we found those apartments, and it was so cool that we're getting everything ready, and we're moving in, and there's this little lady downstairs in the apartment garage, the parking garage of our apartment complex, and she's standing there, and she's just watching us, This is one thing I love about Chinese culture. They just want to know everything. They just want to be in your business, right? I mean, everybody's like that. Americans are like that. They're just not quite as, upfront about it. Chinese people, they're just standing there, just watching. What are they doing? And here we are with all these kids, coming in to this beautiful, it was a very nice apartment complex that we were able to live in. Trees everywhere. It's a really nice place for the kids to walk around that was gated. So we're getting everybody out, and this lady standing there, and she's like, "Foreigner, come here." I was like, oh no, what's she going to say? I could tell by her, the way that she was probably a little bit more educated of a lady. She was an elderly woman. And that she said, "Come here. I need to talk to you about something." And by this time, my Chinese is getting better. I can pretty much understand what she's saying. And she's like, "You want to rent another apartment? You got a lot of kids." And I was like, well, I thought about it. Like, it wouldn't be bad to have another apartment because we could use it for extra things right now, until we got more kids. And she's like, "I've got one. It's on the 19th floor. I'll show it to you right now." So she takes me up there, and she's like, "And I can be a teacher. I heard you have a school. I can be a teacher in your school. I'm a retired teacher." And I thought, oh my word, this is amazing. She's going to let me rent one of her apartments, and she wants to be a teacher in my school. And she was so precious. I really grew to have such a sweet relationship with her. We did rent one of her apartments. She was a teacher for like a hot minute at our school. She was extremely Chinese in her ways of teaching, and she'd never taught kids with disabilities, but I learned later that she wanted to come in and be a teacher at our school because she wanted to know, like, how do we do it? How do you teach kids with disabilities? She had such a heart for our kids. She just didn't know how to express that. So I'll never forget her. I'll also never forget, she's probably the very first person that I extremely offended because her first paycheck was for $250, Chinese dollars, yuan. And I gave her the money, here's your pay. And she said, "No, I won't accept it. I need you to give me 251, not 250. And no one was with me. I don't know why. Most of the time, either an IE was with me or somebody else. And I said, "No, Sunai, your pay is 250, not 251. I don't even have 251. She's like, "I will not accept 250. I will only accept 251. Or if you have to, 249. I was like, "I don't understand why you won't accept." And this went on for like 10 minutes. We're just going back and forth, back and forth. And my Chinese was horrible. I didn't understand it. She was telling me all these things, and I didn't have a clue what she was telling me. And she's like, "Just take it home. Just take it back. Go home. I'm not taking the money." And so I'm so frustrated, and I go back home, and I'm talking to the other Chinese ladies, and they're being very slow. They're trying to help me to understand. They're like, "Melodie, 250 is like a Chinese curse word. Like, nobody would ever give someone 250. It's like you're not worth it." And I was like, "Nobody told me this. How am I supposed to know? Like, how am I supposed to know 250 is bad? Nobody told me." And they're like, "Okay, so here's what you do. You definitely give her 251, not 249, because that's, that would be like not near as good as 251, especially after you've already offended her. Go take it back to her house," because she lived like right next door to us. And so I went back over there, and I'm like, "Sunai, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I'm a foreigner. I didn't know that 250 is a bad word. Bad. And so here's 251. And then she's smiling. She's beaming. And she's like hugging me. And she's like, "I knew you would get it. I knew you would get it, Chen Mei." And so I walked away from that thinking, I literally don't know what just happened. Like, all this mess has happened just because of like 1 yuan more or less than what, should have a bad word. Didn't know. So anyway, 250 is a big thing to me for all these years now. But the time where the Lord opened our school was at that time. Our Journey School for the Uniquely Gifted and Talented started really when we moved into these apartments, and we created what we considered to be kind of like a model for that space. And we had about 21 kids when we first started, and all of them were our kids from the orphanage, but the Lord grew the school. He brought in Gao Xing, who is a precious friend, who became the director of the school there, she was just amazing. She is amazing. And she helped me so much. We worked together for so many years, and is still my really dear friend. So Gaoxing helped me to hire different people to come in and teach. We had an English class, math class, Chinese class, music class, and art class. We had 5 classes, and then we had PE. We started every day with physical activities outside, and so much fun. We loved it. But that is kind of how our school started. And we had parent meetings whenever we started having kids come from the community. We required their parents to come for a meeting and to build community, because those parents did not know anybody that had children with disabilities. Their child had been kind of hidden in the background. And so many amazing things happened during this time where the Lord allowed us to hire more IEs. So more children came, more IEs would come. We would rent another apartment. So over the years, this happened. Also over the years, lots of other things happened. Kids would come into our care and then have to leave and go back to the orphanage. Some kids would come into our care and would die. They wouldn't survive. And so there are so many really heavy stories that are all in between in the mix of this 7-year time of caring for kids with disabilities overseas. And the really hardest part of all of that was at the end, where the Lord closed the door completely, and the government shifted, and the children had to all be removed from our homes and go back into the government orphanages. And this happened all across China. We were not exempt from that. And just really huge tragedy for the children, right? It was extremely traumatic for all of us caring for them, but the ones who really suffered and are still suffering are the kids. So there's so many parts to that. But at that time, we had about 80 kids in our home. And thankfully, Sammy and George's adoptions were almost done. And so they let Sammy and George stay with us. Yame's adoption had already been done, years before that. But as the time went on, the government was getting stricter and stricter and stricter. And so then we had to move back to the States. During that time, I delivered Shan. Julie was already born. And that was also a really traumatic thing that happened whenever Shan was born, and he was born in China. But also with all that trauma, the Lord had so many miracles. There were miracles every single day. I can't even express. One day I'm going to write a book just about miracles, but so many miracles that happened that allowed us to be safe and get the paperwork that we needed to get out of China so that our kids could come with us and not have any issues there. And then we were able to leave, and we got to the States on December 1st of 2018. And a lot of things transpired during that time. Lots of hard, lots of good, so many provisions. God provided a place for us to live where we didn't have to pay rent for 3 years, where we were able to get on our feet. And the first year that we were in America, my board was, asking, Melodie, what do you feel like God wants you to do now? And at first I was just so traumatized. I didn't have a clue. This is not my plan. My plan was to live in China forever. And that's the life that I had surrendered to. I didn't want to come back to the States, and I didn't want to have this life. And just crying out to God, like, what in the world have you done? I was willing to be there. I was willing to be in that hard. And now you want me to come back to America? And I don't even know how to live in America anymore. And the reverse culture shock was really big. And my husband at the time, didn't have a clue how to live in America. And my children, Sammy and George had never been to America until we arrived. Yame had only been a few times. Julie was born in America, but then immediately went back to China. So there's just so many things surrounding all this move. And then about 3 months in March, the Lord said, Melodie, I've not changed what I call you. You're to do the same thing. You're to be a voice for the voiceless. You're to be a mother to the motherless. You're supposed to be an advocate for those in need. And you need to have Journey School in America. And I was like, Journey School in America? That's ridiculous. Like, America has public school. Public school helps kids with disabilities. I have no idea. how to serve American children with disabilities who have parents that love them and care about them. What is that even going to look like? And I'm not equipped for that. And the Lord said, well, you haven't been equipped for any of this. I'm the one that does the equipping. You just have to be obedient. It was so humbling. Once again, like, Lord, I do not know. I don't know how it's going to work. But I told my board, they pretty much told me that I was crazy, but if this is what God's telling you, then you should probably do it, and we will be here to support you, but we kind of think it's crazy. And, one of my board members said, do you even know how to start a school in America? I was like, no, I have no idea. But I haven't known how to do any of this. So I guess that the Lord is going to help. And I just started meeting with people. I met with a dear friend, Christina, who someone introduced me to that I didn't know previously. I'm like, how did you start your school? She had also been an overseas worker for a long time. And, she kind of held my hand and helped me a little bit to know how to do some things. And I researched Google, in China for all those years I hadn't had Google. It was kind of like a very big culture shock that you can just Google anything. And there it was. By August of 2019, Journey School began. And now we're almost in the end of our 7th year of Journey School, which I can't even imagine. And the Lord has performed so many miracles. He has been so faithful, and he's provided for every single thing. And just even in this podcast, when the Lord told me last year in the middle of a really hard season that he wanted me to write a book and start a podcast. And I was like, nope, you're wrong. This is hard. Life is hard. I feel once again like a failure. I don't even know what to write. My life seems like a shambles. Like, what are you going to do, Lord? I don't understand. And he was like, Melodie, what have I told you? It's not about you. It's about me. It's about the Lord. It's about the story he wants to tell. And I just get to come along for the ride. And so there are so many parts about story, the work that the Lord has done, the kids, the ministry overall, that I feel like that the Lord wants people to be a part of and to understand and to hear and to know that you're not alone, that grief and hard and trauma isn't without hope. God longs to bring hope in the middle of your lament, in the middle of your grieving, in the middle of your desperation. The Lord is there, and he hasn't left you. He hasn't forsaken you. And if that has been the most resounding thing in my whole life, it's been nothing. It has been just that the Lord is the one who creates and provides and sustains, and he will never fail. And so as we get more into our podcast, I'm so excited to be able to journey with you guys and share more about the goodness of the Lord.